friend, and welcome to Gore. Savage and beautiful, John Norman's Gorean saga is brought to life in the Tales of Gore role-playing game and its companion world book, World of Gore. Take flight on a tarn, luxuriate in the bathhouses of Ar, pit your steel against the deadly Curry, best your enemies and place them in your collar. Tales of Gore uses the D6 system, perfect for both new and old players. You can purchase it from Amazon, RPG Now, or Lulu.com. Ta Sada Gore. I've been asked to do some videos on Gore specifically, since I put out the game, and things about it to try and appeal to the different Gorean communities, to explain and give demonstrations, I guess, of different aspects of it. So I don't expect this to be hugely popular or anything, but since people have asked, might as well meet the demand. And it may be of some interest to the curious and the rubberneckers. So I really couldn't have put Gore out at a worse time. I think the role-playing community is as or more politically divided than any other community out there, really, save perhaps politics itself. It has become an extremely censorious space, and the kind of topics and issues that Tales of Gore deals with are the kind of things that set off a certain subset of these censorious people. It seems peculiar to me that they have no trouble, it seems, understanding the difference between fantasy and reality when it comes to violence, or magic, or dragons, or anything. But somehow, when it comes to gender dynamics in a fantasy world, that somehow seems to throw them off. I don't really understand it. I think one of the big strengths, one of the really good things about role-playing is being able to put yourself into a different mindset, even a completely alien mindset, and to inhabit it and feel it out and live within that world. But I digress. So one of the things that's really become apparent to me since putting Tales of Gore out is how different communities of people that intersect with Gore don't get on. And it was always my hope that Tales of Gore would provide a sort of common language between the different Gorean communities. I don't actually expect that to happen, but it was a faint hope. So what are these communities, and what can they get from Tales of Gore, and how are they perhaps screwing things up for themselves? I will now arrogantly speak on this. First and foremost, I suppose, there are the fans of the books themselves. There's 30-odd volumes in the Gorean saga, most of them from the viewpoint of Talcobot, others from other viewpoints, including those of slaves taken from Earth and so forth. Now, the thing about the books is that for a long time they were basically unsellable, not because they weren't popular, but because the political tide was already shifting back then. Now, with the advent of electronic publishing, print on demand being much more available, the books are available again, and Norman has penned a few new volumes. So that's alleviated somewhat, but it does mean that the fans of the books have been the people that kept Gore going, really, sharing illegal copies online, talking about them in forums and so on, the world that was presented and everything else. I mean, it is a big saga, and it is well detailed, and the world building is really good. People criticise the writing style and his tendency to pontificate on certain things, but when it comes to world building, when it comes to the world that he's created and presented, I think a lot of better considered authors could learn a lot from what he did in Gore. So the reading community, they were starved of books for many years, and if you wanted more Gore, The only way to get it was through sometimes good but usually quite shoddy fanfic. Now, the people who read the books and are centered upon the books want everything to be by the book, which is a little tricky because there are contradictions in the writing and the way things have changed and developed over time. And this probably stands in the way of their getting involved in the role-playing community, because if you're telling stories set within the Gorean world, you cannot help but go beyond whatever is set out in the books. Characters are usually exceptional and may act differently to how things are presented in the books. The books should only ever be viewed as a guideline for that, but you don't need to consider your stories that you and anyone else you play with to be canonical. You're creating your own branch, your own subset, your own fork of the Gorean universe with your own characters who do things. And if you want, you can always write up your adventures as slightly shoddy fanfic. I tend to find gaming of any kind, role-playing in any world, to be more satisfying than writing fiction, because you never quite know what's going to happen, and you do have to really understand the motivations of your characters, why they do the things that they do. So I think book fans, if they dipped their toe into the water and tried a role-playing game, not even necessarily the Gorean one, I think they would find quite a lot there that would appeal to them. And if you look back to the early days of Dungeons and Dragons and so on, you can spot the influence from the Gorean cycle in those books, particularly perhaps the infamous Silver Princess supplement. Look it up online. So my appeal to fans of the books would be, if you want more Gorean stories, you can make them through playing games, and you don't even have to be a good writer or anything else. The group dynamic creates the stories, the ways the characters interact, the way the games master presents the world to you and how it acts and reacts. That's what makes the stories. So you don't even have to be a particularly good storyteller. The dynamic of the game encourages that to happen through the medium of play. So if you want more Gorean stories, I heartily recommend the game. While I was researching for Tales of Gore and trying to gauge the community that existed, I found that there was a plethora of role-playing chat rooms, IRC rooms, Second Life arenas, IMVU, whatever it's called, rooms, you name it. There's Gorean stuff all over there, spread out all over the shop. This was encouraging because people had put a tremendous amount of effort into it, particularly in Second Life. But it was also discouraging because most of these places, however grand and well designed they were virtually empty, and a lot of the role-playing that was going on in them appeared to be quite unambitious, shall we say. Everyone had their own particular interpretations, which is fine, of course, but they tended to view their version as being superior to that of everybody else. The idea of having fun seemed to have disappeared quite a lot, and were the by-the-book people who wanted everything to be exactly as it was in the books, and therefore that was stultifying and seemed to choke any life out of the roleplay that was going on. And then on the other hand, you had people that completely discarded the books and seemed to pay them no attention whatsoever. These places tending to be ones that were dominated by Panther girls who were launching armed raids on settlements and things like that, which just doesn't fit the book at all. There were a few places in between, but by and large things tended to be quite polarised. No two areas seemed to have rules that were compatible with each other. I did find one set of chat rooms that weirdly were using the SLA Industries rules, which seems like an odd choice since even the creators of those rules from the original edition seemed to think that they were a bad rule system, but still, that was there. In Second Life, they have HUD systems, heads-up display systems, which allow characters to engage in combat, and that varies from place to place as well, seeming to require a different number of HUDs and setups and God knows what else in order to participate. And everywhere had pages and pages and pages of rules that you had to follow while you were there. Needless to say, this is not particularly welcoming, so while they have created good backgrounds, they tended to be rather lifeless, and the roleplay seemed to be quite unambitious in that most people seem to be focused upon the idea of basically playing house with a Gorean theme. If you're going to bother to inhabit a character in another world that is full of danger and amazing flora and fauna and different societies and so on, I can see the appeal in part of having a living world around you, but this is typically the stuff in games that is relegated to non-player characters, people that you visit to get things done for you while you engage in adventures and stories and so on. What makes the Gorean books appealing is in part the detail that he puts into the everyday life of the people, but really it's the high adventure, the planetary romance aspect, angle to it, the fantasy part. If you're spending all your time role-playing, making leather goods or stirring the porridge, I think you're somehow missing out on those aspects that make it so interesting. It's not the Society for Creative Anachronism, though there were Goreans involved in that, calling themselves Tushuks, I believe, so, maybe. And if you're into that, that's fine, but there seems to be an hostility to people who want to do more, who want to create stories, who want to do something more grandiose, more meaningful, more adventurous with it. Hopefully, the resources that Tales of Gore can provide in terms of like a setting bible and a common set of rules, maybe the rules can be converted into some of these rooms, then you would have a common language to talk between different areas, and maybe a heads-up display could be developed that handles the rules for you as they apply there. It's part of the problem you have with combat HUDs and things is that characters whose backgrounds suggest that they should be better at combat might be played by people who are hopeless at playing combat games like that, and people whose characters should be hopeless at fighting can be very good at whatever it is they happen to have in the games. That throws immersion and causes problems. So I would encourage those people involved in online roleplay to set their sights a little higher, to try and tell stories rather than just recreating the mundane aspects of the world, which should be there as a background and a basis, but you can do so much more. Reach for more. You'll have more fun. You'll probably get more people too. If you've heard nothing else about Gore, if you've not read the books, if you've not encountered the communities online anywhere else, then you've probably heard of Gore through salacious, hyperbolic stories about sex cults and things. And so this is where this comes in. There are people who seek to emulate the Gorean lifestyle in real life. This ranges from people who add a Gorean theme to their kinky sex play to people who try to live a master and slave lifestyle 24/7 a day, following the Gorean norms from the books. Not my particular bag, at least not to the extent that some of them take it. Yeah, I'm into kink, and I don't see any problem with having a Gorean theme to it, and consent is baked in to BDSM play of all kinds, so that I don't see any problem with it. Your kink may not be my kink, but knock yourselves out and have fun. Gorean lifestylers are, however, looked down upon by just about everybody else in every community that they intersect with. I think this is unfair, but it is true, and it has led to something of an understandable siege mentality amongst Gorean lifestylers. And so they tend to look down on everybody else around them. They look on a lot of, I'm speaking generally obviously, but they look on other BDSM play as not being as wholehearted as it could be, and they're very dismissive of femdom, for example, even though there's plenty of examples of that in the book. They tend to view role players as being somehow disrespectful to what they're doing. But look, it all comes from a set of fantasy novels. It's not real. You may wish it was, you may feel a strong connection to what's presented in the fiction, but it is fiction. And however close you get your lifestyle to how you think a Gorean lifestyle would be, you will never get there. The only way to really, even remotely, interact with this fantasy world is to indulge in fantasy play. And so it makes no sense to look down on people who are role-playing within that world. If anything, they're closer to that Gorean lifestyle than you can ever be, because they are, however temporarily, entering a fantasy world in which they can encounter Thalarian and Lals and Priest Kings, in which they can get into sword fights and steal slaves from a rival city-state, all those kind of things. Whereas you can't. All you can do is have someone who volunteers and consents to be your submissive in a Gorean style and serve you food or whatever. You know, that's it. That's all you've got. So I don't think people should be dismissive of you, but I don't think you should be dismissive of other people. And you often make, it seems, the online space for people who are interested in the books or the roleplay, you tend to make that quite hostile for them, quite difficult for them, with your superiority and the way you look down on them. Surely there is room for a larger, broader community of people who like the books, like the fantasy and so on, and can look past each other's quirks, because everyone is looked down upon for their interest in some way or another. And surely it would be better to come together and create a broader community and to understand that different people interact with fiction that they love in different ways, and no particular way is invalid, though some may be a bit more triggering for people. So I think Gorean roleplay can add an element, even for lifestylers, as a way for them to interact with gore in a way that they can't in real life. And I don't think any of these things should be looked down upon. They may not be for you, but that doesn't mean that they're no good or no fun for somebody else. Now, there's probably very few people that are actually coming to gore through the RPG. It's more likely to be vice versa. But I think it's important for people who are coming to this through the game, or rekindling their interest through the game, to recognise that we are Johnny-come-latelys to all this. The Gorean community has developed by itself online in a fairly insular fashion for many years. The release of new books is great, providing more interest, more information, more detail, more opportunities for people. But Norman is very old, and there are unlikely to be that many more books in the future. So the future of the series is going to be increasingly nostalgic and increasingly staid, but there is going to be increasingly, paradoxically, more room for different takes, different interpretations, different adventures, and so on. The adventures that we're putting out for Tales of Gore are by no means whatsoever canonical in any way, but they exist within the world that Norman created. They tie up loose ends, they expand on things. While none of it should be taken as canon, it occupies, I guess, a kind of pseudo-canonical existence, in that it draws on what's already there, and that can be a good guide for the way other people might want to do adventures in other mediums set within the Gorean universe. To people who have been doing things one way for a long time, presenting a new way of doing things can feel hostile and dismissive. So if you find yourself going into these spaces and due to being interested the cause of the game, please be polite, please be deferential, and the best way to be an evangelist for role-playing games is just to be enthusiastic without necessarily being pushy. Maybe host some online games or something, invite people to come and play, show them what you've got, show them the books if you have copies that you can show to people, things like that, but try not to be disruptive. And since I've been asked to do this series, if you have any questions about Tales of Gore the RPG, even if they're mean ones or whatever else, I will be happy to answer them as this series goes on. I'm probably going to end up doing about one of these videos a month, so you've got plenty of time and space to offer up any questions or queries about rules, about the background, about the lore, about any of it. So hopefully I've sketched out the different communities, how they intersect, where the problems lie, and I think for the role players that problem is going to be you're coming into something that other people have done, as well as the hostile and dismissive attitude in role playing in general at the moment. But you know, games are meant to be fun, so concentrate on that aspect, whatever side you happen to fall on, and you can't go too far wrong. Zang.